Moscow, May 1985. The air is thick, suffocating, not just from the early summer heat baking the concrete of the Soviet capital, but from the invisible, crushing weight of total surveillance. In a quiet apartment, a man stands behind a curtain, staring down at the street below. His name is Oleg Gordievsky. To the outside world, he is a highly decorated colonel in the KGB, a man destined for the absolute highest echelons of Soviet intelligence. But as he watches the unmarked sedans idling on the corner, and the men in cheap suits reading newspapers that never seem to turn a page, his blood turns to ice. He knows the terrifying truth. They know. The KGB's infamous Directorate K, the ruthless hunters of traitors, have finally caught his scent. Just days earlier, he was lured to a remote KGB compound outside the city. A seemingly friendly drink with his superiors quickly turned into a psychological nightmare. They secretly drugged his cognac. They interrogated him for hours while his mind swam in a chemical hallucinogenic fog. By some miracle of human willpower, he survived, denying everything. But survival inside the KGB is rarely permanent. It is merely a delay. Gordievsky is now a dead man walking. His apartment is entirely wired with hidden microphones. His every single footstep is shadowed by elite watchers from the KGB's surveillance directorate. The steel doors of the Lubyanka interrogation cells are already opening for him. It is no longer a question of if he will be dragged into the executioner's basement. It is only a matter of when. 2,000 miles away, inside the heavily fortified walls of MI6 headquarters in London, the realization of Gordievsky's peril triggers absolute cold sweat panic. To British intelligence, he is not just another agent. He is Sunbeam, the single most valuable spy the Western world has ever possessed inside the Soviet machine. For over a decade, Gordievsky has been the ultimate insider, quietly feeding the KGB's deepest, darkest secrets directly to London and Washington. Just 2 years prior, in 1983, the world stood blindfolded on the absolute edge of nuclear annihilation. A NATO military exercise had convinced the deeply paranoid Soviet leadership that a real preemptive nuclear strike was underway. Soviet fingers were literally hovering over the launch buttons. It was Gordievsky, risking his life, who smuggled out the frantic intelligence that allowed the West to back down and de-escalate. He quite literally saved the world from World War III. Now the man who saved the world is trapped in an inescapable cage. If the KGB breaks him, and the KGB breaks everyone, the consequences will be catastrophic. Every Western intelligence network behind the Iron Curtain will be completely annihilated. The geopolitical balance of power will violently collapse. MI6 owes him an impossible debt. But how do you pull a man out of the most heavily policed, paranoid city on planet Earth? When every border is sealed and his shadow is made of KGB agents, you don't use diplomacy, you don't use military force. You execute a plan of pure, desperate madness. A highly classified break glass in case of emergency protocol known only as Operation Pimlico. Operation Pimlico was a masterclass in Cold War tradecraft. For years, MI6 had maintained a dormant break-glass escape plan for their most prized asset. But to trigger it, Gordievsky had to send a signal right under the watchful, paranoid eyes of the KGB. It wasn't a high-tech encrypted radio burst. It was brilliantly, terrifyingly simple. On a bustling Tuesday evening, a man holding a white plastic grocery bag from a British supermarket, Safeway, stood quietly on a very specific corner of Kutuzovsky Prospect. The KGB watchers swarming the area saw nothing out of the ordinary. A few minutes later, an unassuming British diplomat walked past, casually eating a Mars bar. No words were exchanged. Not a single glance was shared. But the silent message echoing back to London was deafening. I am compromised. Get me out. Now. Inside the British Embassy, the machinery of Pimlico roared to life. But the embassy itself was a fortress under siege, monitored 24/7 by Soviet intelligence. Every diplomat who drove out the gates was immediately shadowed by unmarked KGB cars. To extract Gordievsky, the British agents had to execute a flawless symphony of deception, burning their own tails by weaving through the sprawling Moscow subway and the labyrinth of the city streets, creating a brief, invisible window of opportunity. July 1985. The point of no return. Gordievsky knows this is his one, impossibly narrow chance at survival. He embarks on the most terrifying run of his life. He weaves through the concrete canyons of Moscow apartment blocks, doubling back, changing his appearance in the shadows, perfectly executing the very anti-surveillance tradecraft he once taught to Soviet spies. For a few precious hours, he vanishes from the grid. He boards a train bound for the north toward Leningrad, and then a local bus that drops him near a desolate, heavily militarized zone near the border of Finland. The man who shaped the destiny of global superpowers is now reduced to hiding in the damp brush of a mosquito-infested forest, staring at a lonely stretch of asphalt. Every snapping twig sounds like a KGB hit squad. If the British don't show up, this forest will be his unmarked grave. Suddenly, the rumble of engines breaks the silence. Two British diplomatic Ford sedans pull violently onto the dirt shoulder. The trunk of one car pops open. In a frantic, breathless blur of seconds, Gordievsky hurls himself into the cramped, sweltering darkness of the boot. He curls his body around the spare tire. The heavy metal lid slams shut, plunging him into absolute blackness. He is sealed inside a rolling metal coffin. The engines roar and the cars tear back onto the highway, racing straight toward the teeth of the Soviet Empire, the most fortified, heavily armed border checkpoint of the Iron Curtain. The temperature inside the trunk is a boiling, toxic cocktail of exhaust fumes, raw gasoline, and sheer paralyzing terror. For hours, Gordievsky is violently thrown against the spare tire as the British sedans tear down the cracked Soviet highways. Every single jolt of the suspension is a countdown. Every siren in the distance feels like the executioner arriving. Suddenly, the screech of brakes. The cars slam to a halt. The engine idles. They have reached the absolute edge of the Soviet Union, the Vyborg border checkpoint, the Iron Curtain itself. Through the thin metal of the trunk, Gordievsky hears the heavy rhythmic crunch of military boots on the gravel. Russian voices bark orders. Passports are aggressively examined. The tension is razor sharp. But then comes the sound that freezes the blood in his veins. The aggressive, guttural snarling of KGB sniffer dogs. The Soviet border guards are walking the dogs around the perimeter of the diplomatic vehicles. The animals are trained to find exactly this: the scent of fear, of adrenaline, of a human being hiding where they shouldn't be. The heavy paws scratch against the bumper. The dogs stop. They begin to aggressively sniff the exact seam of the trunk where Gordievsky is lying, suffocating, gasping for a single breath of air. Centimeters, literally inches of cheap British steel, are the only things separating the man who saved the world from a bullet in the back of the head. The dogs are about to bark. The game is over. But inside the car, the British operatives execute a move of pure, improvised genius. In a calculated display of arrogant nonchalance, the wife of the British diplomat cracks her window. She tosses a pungent, strong-smelling bag of cheese and onion crisps directly onto the pavement, while casually tending to her crying baby right near the trunk lid. The overpowering, bizarre scent creates an immediate wall of sensory overload. The dogs are confused, their noses overwhelmed by the sharp smell of onion and the distraction of the child. The Soviet guards, annoyed by the screaming infant and the chaotic mess, wave their hands in disgust. They step back. The heavy iron barrier slowly creaks open. The cars accelerate. They drive for a painfully long time, putting miles between themselves and the Soviet guns. Finally, the sedans pull off the dirt road. The engine cuts out. The lock on the trunk clicks. The lid swings open, flooding the dark, suffocating box with blinding daylight and the freezing, beautifully crisp air of Finland. Gordievsky slowly pulls himself up. He looks out at the endless green trees. He is alive. He is free. Operation Pimlico didn't just extract a man. It humiliated the KGB on their own heavily guarded soil. Oleg Gordievsky would go on to brief the highest leaders of the free world, providing the critical intelligence that ultimately helped tear down the Soviet Empire. The man who survived the drugged cognac, the paranoid streets of Moscow, and the terrifying darkness of a car trunk walked into the light and changed the course of human history forever.